what motivated you to do a piece of research in regards to mafia networks and sort of start researching this kind of topic area?
Okay. Yeah. So in general, I've always been fascinated by how informal power structures coexist with formal institutions. So by the ways that people and organizations coordinate outside of the law, yet often in close proximity to it. But for me, the interest was not just academic, it was also personal, because I grew up in Naples, which is the homeland of the Camorra, one of the historical criminal organizations in southern Italy, whose existence dates back at least to the 18th century. So it's one of the oldest ones, that at least for historical records that we have in the world. So this mafia type organization was a part of the social landscape, So for me, it was not an abstract concept. I heard about frequent talks about shootings in the neighborhoods. And actually, when I was 10 years old, a bomb exploded in front of my house because a local construction firm, which owned by friends of my family, refused to pay the so-called pizzo, which is essentially extortion money that local businesses are often forced to give for protection. And by the way, the construction sector is one of the sectors which have been historically infiltrated, because they have certain characteristics which lend themselves well to the infiltration of these type of organizations. These experiences, these thoughts made me question the simplistic idea that sometimes I heard, which was that mafia is purely a cultural phenomenon. It is, something embedded in southern Italy. And I started to wonder this because there was organized crime, but on the other hand, I was surrounded by good people, honest people that went every day to work to feed up their families in an honest way. So I started wondering whether there were more structural explanations to these kinds of phenomena. So maybe there was something behind about inequality, lack of alternatives, especially referring to young people in certain deprived areas, failure of state enforcement, or maybe economic incentives that make organized crime a rational choice for someone. So then when I studied, academically speaking, then I studied economics. I started to work on organized crime when, for my master's dissertation, I wrote a dissertation on mafia and politics. And then following this dissertation, I decided to join this PhD project led by Professor Giuseppe De Feo, who is now head of department at the University of Liverpool. And this project was subsequently funded by the British Academy as well. It was on mafia institutions and socio-economic development. So with this project, I could keep working on the subject. So what happened one day is that, so I remember I was at the beginning of my PhD, and I was interested in network analysis. So I got into this fascinating subject. So network analysis is essentially a set of mathematical and statistical tools to study relationships within complex systems. It derives from graph theory, which is essentially a branch of mathematics studying graphs, which are structures made of abstract structures made of relationships and between entities. And what network analysis does is to apply tools of graph theory to real-world networks. So basically, this was very fascinating for me because the network analysis tools are applicable in a variety of domains. If you go to biology, they study protein-protein networks. In physics, they study power grid networks. In media studies, you can model information diffusion or misinformation diffusion with social media networks. And of course, in the criminal world, you can model, the relationships between criminals. So I was interested in that subject, but one day it happened that we discovered these forgotten pages from the archives of the first Anti-Mafia Parliamentary Commission that we have in Italy. And it looked to us a gold mine because we found, this information was public, but no one knew about it. So it was quite difficult to find. Sure. So these pages contain thousands of personal records of people who were supposedly thought to be linked to the mafia by relationships of exchanges of favors. So essentially, we realized that with this information, we could build a clientelistic network, so a network in which relationships represented exchanges of favors between people. Of course, their nature was mainly illegal. These exchanges were based on differences in power positions among individuals in this network. So so at that point, for me, it was the perfect match between what I was studying, so network analysis at that time, which is, I have to say, not really very common in economics, because in economics we are more obsessed by cause and effect relationships. So statistically speaking, we mostly study causal inference methods, but still I found some papers that tried to merge network analysis with causal inference, and then I started to wonder what I could have done with these network analysis tools. So basically, there was this match between data availability, which is always the at least for us, for economists who do quantitative research, data is the most important thing, because you can have a brilliant idea, but if you don't have the data to implement it, it just stays in your mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was a perfect match. Of course, the data is not, this is true for all the data, especially for criminal data. Data was not perfect because for instance, we could not distinguish a precise temporal dimension for the events. So we just know that the facts described in these files refer to events happening in the 60s and 70s, but we couldn't identify a precise timestamp for all of these events. So essentially, we could build this network, but this network is a snapshot, so it's not changing over time. It's a fixed snapshot of what was happening at that time. But still, it was a goldmine, because these kinds of networks, especially between composed of relationships of criminal nature, are quite rare to find. And the cool thing is that, as compared to the few other studies that studied criminal networks, this network also included people coming from the institutional world, so from the legitimate and official world, like politicians, public officials, entrepreneurs, and so on and so forth. And this was the distinctive feature of this data set as compared to other works that dealt mainly with network data sets composed only of individuals coming from mafia type organizations, essentially. So this allowed us to study the connections between the criminal world and the institutional world.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I think it'd be interesting, just to start off with in particular, just to give us a background into the research area of the mafia activity in Italy. I think, particularly whether if you're in the UK or some other countries as well, it's maybe hard to conceptualize how influential these organized criminal activities are. I mean, there's some data I was looking at that was suggesting that 20 to 25% of the Italian economy is made up from like the black economy, so activities outside of the realm of legal practices, compared to, say, sort of 8 to 12% in either Germany or England or some of the other places. So I was hoping that you could maybe give me just a little bit of background as to the influence of these mafia activities first, before we, just to set the tone of the research as a whole.
Okay, so first of all, regarding the numbers that you mentioned, when it comes to estimate the shadow economy, we must be careful in defining, first of all, what we are estimating, because the shadow economy is, I would say, that is made of three main blocks. So of course, we have legal but undeclared activities. So for instance, I run a restaurant and I don't declare all the profits that I'm making. Then there is a block represented by the informal economy, so which represents mainly small cash-based jobs like plumbers, hairdressers, Uh, so something like that. And then you have illegal markets as well. So illegal activities like drug trafficking, prostitution, smuggling, and so on and so forth. So when we look at these figures, we should first of all look at what they are estimating, because for
Right. Yeah, okay.
there are sometimes there are some institutes that do not explicitly take into account illegal markets, or maybe they give more weight to one of these blocks as compared to the other. And then also there is also a huge variety in the estimation methods the statistical methods that they can use to estimate, because of course that's an economy. So you are estimating what is happening. You don't know exactly what is happening over there.
So completeness of the data is really troublesome for this, obviously, because you're trying to look for something that isn't necessarily presenting itself in the activity. If you're looking at tax receipts and all this kind of stuff, you're looking. It's that kind of completeness of data problem. It's one thing to determine accuracy on certain things, but to check for something that isn't there that you think should be there is actually quite like a difficult thing to estimate. So I completely take your point that data integrity and the is a kind of a problem with a lot of these similar research areas and statistics that we use. And then to your further point, just because we put it under the umbrella term of the dark economy doesn't necessarily, it means it's complete, drug trafficking and the things that people would necessarily associate with criminal activity. To your point, it could just be simply sort of cash in hand work for someone that is below the, has like a personal allowance anyway that wouldn't have any tax implications anyway, for example. So it probably So in your view then, are these statistics for Italy potentially overrepresenting the scope of like particularly a mafia and sort of organized gang technology, generally speaking?
Yeah, well, I don't want to say that. I just mean to say that we should be careful at what we are measuring and what estimation method we are using. But it's clear if you look at the statistics, even from various taking various methods into account and using various methods and taking various aspects of the problem into account, it is clear that there is a problem that to some extent would never disappear, and you need to find ways to to contain this problem, of course. So I didn't mean to say that the problem is not there, but just that if you go, for instance, you mentioned something like around 20%. If you go to the Italian National Institute of Statistics, you would find another number because they are included.
Sure, yeah,
and they're estimating that differently. But that's important also when you are evaluating the trends over time of these shadow economies. And there is a lively research on that. I mean, I've never done personal research on the estimation methods of the shadow economies, but it's very interesting. They have sometimes very smart ways. For instance, there is this method that uses electricity consumption. So basically, if electricity is growing at as compared to the GDP, it means that something hidden, some interproduction is over there. Of course, nowadays they have also more complex estimation methods and models, but still, it's interesting to see what happens over there. But no, I didn't mean to say that.
No. It's interesting how the estimation methods and to your point, the ways they try and do these things. I think I've even heard of instances where they'll use GPS tracking in some instances to look at the skyline at night to see like how illuminated regions are, and they'll try and cross and analyze that with what they think the general activity should be, and they have actually quite interesting methodology for doing that. Now the problem is with all these things, there's caveats to your point about electricity consumption. There are industries that use more electric consumption or power consumption than others, and so all of these really are sort of estimation methods. To that point of trying to assess for completeness of data, which is the problem that you're trying to look for something that isn't there, and is kind of the struggle, I think. But going to the specific data set that you're using for your research, I think from what I could see, the data set ranged from 1963 to 1976 approximately. And it was from this Anti-Mafia Commission.
Yeah.
I was hoping you could give me a little bit more context into just what that commission was doing, and why is it this specific time span that we have for this data that you've been able to use in your research?
Yeah, so basically so first of all, the Anti-Mafia Parliamentary Commission is a political commission that has been founded in 1962. And these files come from the first one that has been established, even though these files have been published some years later. So they've been released to the public some years later. They were compiled. Essentially, this commission is still operating nowadays. It's a commission where they meet and discuss about problems about organized crime, how law enforcement is doing, and what we can do to deal with the problem. So it's a specialized commission that we have in Italy. And so they decided, essentially what they did at that time, which is, it is quite unique because looking, at least to my knowledge, looking at the archives or even of the subsequent commissions, they have never published anymore something like that. Essentially, what they did, they took information of about these exchanges of favors from a variety of sources. So if you go to the files, you also find on the left-hand side the source of the information, and the sources could be local newspapers, political speeches. They could be sentences as well. They could be coming from the police reports and so on and so forth. So probably at that time it was they were published for a matter of transparency. So just to communicate that they had nothing to hide as a parliamentary commission to the public. Even though then these files we realized that were not that visible as we thought, because it was quite difficult to find them as well.
And as you were going through the research, what started to become clear? What were the findings of the research as you were conducting the study?
Yeah, so basically what we found, what we wanted to do with this data set was to apply. So first we built the network, and it took a lot of time because at that time there was no, there was machine learning of course, but we were not at the stage we are today. So there was no AI tool like ChatGPT that help you in automatically building a network by using some NLP algorithm to extract text from data and then put the data in the format of relationships. Well, this is something that I would try to do now to see what happens if ChatGPT gives me another kind of networks as compared to the I manually built. So basically, we read all these pages, we inferred connections from all these pages, and then we manually built the network dataset. So once we had it, then what we wanted to do was to study weather, which was something that other works had done. But again, having networks composed of criminal members only, to study the centrality positions of individuals, to check whether which were the most important individuals who were the most important individuals in the networks, and if being a mafia boss would correlate with some of these what we call centrality measures in network analysis. So centrality measures are statistical measures of the importance of individuals, of the topological importance of individuals in the network. So their importance in terms of the architecture of the relationships. So what we did with the different models, we saw how the probability of being a mafia boss correlated with these centrality measures. We computed different ones to capture different nuances of individual interconnectedness. So, for instance, you can have simple indicators like degree centrality, which is simply telling you how many connections you have. But then you can have betweenness centrality that tells you your brokerage ability. So what is your ability to act as an intermediary in the network? So how oftentimes you are on the path between individuals in the network. You can have closeness centrality, which tells you on average how close you are to other people in the networks in terms of the links that you need to take to go from one person to the other. So we used, what we found was that, first of all, bosses, which was in line with previous empirical evidence, bosses tend to be more connected, tend to be more central in terms of connections to other individuals in the network. But we went further. So because since we had connections between criminal and institutional members, we tried to separate. So we separated these types of connections. And so what we did is to study. So first we studied the overall importance of mafia bosses in the network, but then we tried to separate their importance in terms of links that they have with the criminals, with other criminals, and links that they have with the institutional world. And there comes our more interesting finding, because when we compute these centrality measures by taking into account the links with either with criminals or institutional members separately, what we find is that mafia bosses, most of the centrality, if not all of the centrality of mafia bosses, comes from their connections with the institutional world. And that was our novelty. That's a very interesting result, and we interpreted it as mafia bosses acting as an interface between the criminal underworld and the legitimate official institutional afterworld. And also, if we want to go get more into some of the details, what I found interesting is that there was, so when considering only criminal connections, there was in particular only one centrality measure that was relevant for mafia bosses, which is the eigenvector centrality, which is essentially telling you that you are more central as you are more connected to players who are more connected themselves. So instead of considering how many connections you have, you are, even if you have few connections, but those few connections have in turn a lot of connections, you are considered important because you are connected to well-connected individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting because mafia bosses are I think they are the criminals in general, they face a trade-off between the need of communicating with other members, but the need of secrecy as well. So,
Sure.
So you want to communicate, but on the other hand, you don't want to communicate that much, because if they discover another person, you face the risk of being caught by public authority.
Being exposed to the fact that you're a bit doing criminal activity, right? Yeah.
So in that sense, internally to the criminal organization, bosses were strategically placing themselves, because they had few connections, but they were connected to the players that were more connected. And then on the regarding the institutional connections, they were the centrality measures that we found most correlated with the probability of being a mafia boss were betweenness, which is telling you something about the brokerage capacity of an individual, and closeness. So mafia bosses were on average more acted more as brokers with the institutional world, and also they were more close to the institutional world in terms of the steps of the links that you need to take to get to institutional members. So a person who is closer to the other, to the others on average, is a person who can spread information efficiently in the network and is less dependent from intermediaries. So if you couple these topological roles, so on the one hand, they had few connections within criminal organizations, but they were connected to well-connected people on one end, and they acted as brokers in the institutional world, then that I think that is a very smart way of positioning yourself in a network, because you are balancing that trade-off. You are balancing that trade-off between the need for communicating with others in an efficient way and the need to keep you hidden from law enforcement authorities.
Sure. It's interesting to hear you talk about it, because it feels like a really tricky situation, because on one hand, communication, networks are all really important for how organizations of any kind are able to expand and operate their businesses. But obviously, you have this massive trade-off in that example with mafia activity or these organized gang activities. In that, the more people do you communicate to, the more people have in that system, the more likely you are to be rumbled to the point that you are actually doing some illicit activity. So it almost seems, and you can correct me where if I'm wrong on this. The mafia bosses almost seem to act like a safe filter that then can re-establish networks on the outside very well. It's almost like an hourglass, sort of that pinpoint in the middle of an hourglass. All the information can sort of go through that one pinpoint, but then can branch out very, very quickly, so that you have an understanding that this person can understand the illicit activities, but then also go and communicate in a way that doesn't rumble the general activities to the wider legal networks, so that they can integrate themselves better with society and stuff. So it seems like a really interesting point of connection, and probably that requires a lot of trust. In terms of the actual organizations themselves, because ultimately what you're requiring is one person to have a lot of information about this that then goes to the outside world to try and create those connections. So it probably takes a lot of trust. I imagine these mafia bosses would have to have a lot of trust among the organizations themselves in order to commit that role. And also would have to your point, be very well connected, not necessarily in and of them themselves, but at least be connected to people that are very well connected, so that they can operate in their sort of most efficient function almost.
Yeah, indeed. It is. So you are right. So basically, that's one of, that needs for secrecy is one of also the reasons why mafia bosses, when it comes to do the dirty job, so go and kill someone on the streets, they are often reluctant. They never go, basically. They send other lower rank mobsters to do the dirty job because they want to avoid being caught by public authorities. And in a sense, if you want to parallel this in a network perspective, that's what they are doing indeed. So they want to be, again, they want to be sure that they can quickly spread messages, but on the other hand, they don't wanna. They wanna risk less to be caught by public enforcement authorities. Of course, you need, as you were saying, you need a lot of trust. But depending on the criminal organization, they have ways of enforcing trust, which is first of all intimidation and violence.
Coercion.
Yeah, exactly. As compared to to other types of organizations that have to keep cohesion in other ways. Then, depending on the mafia, on the criminal organization, we are talking about also sometimes kinship ties matter a lot in determining the level of cohesion in the network. But that, again, the main resource that they have to enforce cohesion in the network and also to enforce contracts, enforce pacts with people in the institutional world is violence, essentially, which is used by different criminal organizations to varying extents. But still, that's something. It still remain, even if you don't explicitly use violence, it still remains a credible threat.
Sure.
Of course, these connections, and then.
Yeah, certainly. And I would imagine then, with the way that these networks are set up, it makes it, or at least adds a wrench into the abilities for the police or crime analysts to be able to appropriately analyze, and presents a difficulty for them in terms of trying to target these individuals and these organizations to be able to effectively administer the law and bring down crime in the region. Given your research and the contextual knowledge that you have around the subject, is there something that crime analysts and just the general networks could be doing to try and better approach these networks, to try and diffuse more of the networks themselves?
Yeah, so well, that's a very good question. So when it comes to crime, so first of all, network analysis can give an important contribution because, for instance, traditional criminology, for example, at least in its early forms, tended to focus on individuals and events. So who committed the crime, where, when, and why. Sometimes you go and see, okay, you go and see who this person is connected to whom, but you don't do that in a systematic way. So it's more evidence built around case studies, witness testimonies, and behavioral theories. Of course, I mean, this is an approach which is valuable for understanding, the motives and context, but I mean, it often struggles to find what is more distinctive about organized crime specifically, which is its structure. So criminal organizations, as the name suggests as well, it's not purely a collection of individuals, not purely collections of individuals, but they are systems of relationships. And their power, I think there is always this kind of confusion. The power of mafia type organizations does not lie in violence. So violence, in my opinion, is a resource that they have to enforce their connections, their actions, etc., to undertake their actions, etc. But their real power lies in the relationships that they have. And this is where network analysis can change the game. So at its core, network analysis is about mapping and measuring connections. So you are really taking a broad picture, a full picture of the topology, something that is hardly visible by anecdotal and everyday experience. And network analysis can be a game changer because you can identify key players in the network in terms of their topological role, in terms of their positions in this web of relationships. Because sometimes, for example, it happens that you have a violent criminal in the network that is more visible. Then you go and get this criminal. So this criminal gets convicted, but then the network, the organization is still there. And maybe you have a tax accountant who is not even from the criminal world in the strict sense, who is acting as an intermediary between, mafia bosses and some entrepreneurs who are colluded with mafia bosses because maybe they need to win a public tender, for instance. And in that case, if you target that individual, then you can cause indeed a bigger disruption in the network as compared to when you simply catch, those violent criminals. This is something, of course, that you want to do to catch violent criminals, but from a network perspective, if you think about what happens if I remove a node is an individual in the network. So if I remove an individual from the network, what happens then to the cohesiveness of the network, to the network as a whole? Then network analysis, it can help you target the right individuals. Of course, when it comes to networks of criminal nature, you need to be careful because they are very prone to measurement. I think this is something relating to crime in general. So crimes, from the statistical point of view, is often hard to measure. If you think about especially certain types of crime like extortions, even domestic violence, corruption as well, they tend to be underreported. And then when you see a number, so that those numbers are essentially telling you what the enforcement authorities are detecting or what's being reported and not what's actually there. So maybe you with that number, you are not capturing the real cases of domestic violence, for instance, but you are capturing the local propensity to report those crimes, which can be related to the strength of local institutions in that area or the trust in local institutions. So you don't.
Sure.
We have a set of statistical tools to try and address this kind of measurement errors. And you can have these problems as well with networks of criminal nature. Again, there are tools to deal. Indeed, we use one of them to try and address this problem. But still, you should keep it in mind with crime that what you are seeing is something, and what happens in reality might be different.
No, of course. Data could, to your point, data is only good as the control mechanisms and the way that you actually have to retrieve that data. And if the inputs are not necessarily bad, but incomplete or missing certain things, then the conclusions you're going to be able to draw from those things have to be mitigated, or at least have those things taken into consideration. Obviously, your research in particular, in terms of the data set, is in particular related to Italy and the mafia networks within that region. Are your findings here consistent potentially with mafia networks or just organized crime networks in other regions across the world, Brazil, UK, other nations? Or is it something that's very specific to this region of the world?
So I would say that there are... So I would say the short answer is that these results could be, I mean, there are no data sets to my knowledge. I should collect data on these countries, perform network analysis and see what happens. But what I would expect is that we would still find people in, although these criminal organizations can vary in terms of their historical background, in terms of their modes of operation, in terms of the extent to which they use violence. Still, we could find people in acting as brokers between the criminal world and the institutional world. This is what I would expect, because so criminal organizations are very adaptive organizations. They have proved to be really smart, even in the area of digital technologies. They have proved to so essentially they are highly adaptive. They go and exploit every opportunity of profits that they can make when it comes. So it's they are, I would say, they are quite clever organizations, but still, and I think this is this is the distinctive feature of criminal organizations: their connections with the institutional world, with the legitimate world, with the entrepreneurial world as well. So I do believe that we would find similar, maybe it's not bosses, maybe we find that other people act as brokers, but still we would find similar, relational patterns suggesting that there are crucial brokers in these networks. So,
right.
Of course, there are differences again between these criminal organizations. So for even within Italy itself. So, for instance, the organizational geometry can vary. Cosa Nostra takes a more hierarchical structure. The 'Ndrangheta is more kin-based as compared to is more based on key connections as compared to other criminal organizations, which is an old style way of keeping connections, but which is probably very effective. And indeed, I would say that among the criminal organizations in Italy, 'Ndrangheta is nowadays, internationally speaking, is the most powerful one. Okay. It's very well connected also to Latin America organized criminal organizations, and it's very involved in international drug trafficking. And then we have the Camorra in Naples, which is more fragmented into clans and more entrepreneurial, for example. Then if you go to Brazil, for instance, if you go to groups like the Comando Vermelho, the PCC, they have some differences. For instance, they use. So I've never focused my studies on Brazil, but for what my feeling is that they use more violence more explicitly, and they have at least nowadays, because this was the case for Italy in some periods. At least nowadays, they are exerting a higher. Exerting violence, especially to have a high territorial control in physical ways. They are as well they are infiltrated in politics too, like criminal organizations in Italy. But I'd say that although we can identify common causes, which mainly point, there is a whole strand of literature about causes of the emergence or strengthening of criminal organizations. They all point, even in different contexts, to the same cause, which is institutional weakness and power vacuum which is filled by criminal organizations. So in a sense, criminal organizations propose themselves as a substitute for the official state in places where the state is weak. And this has been observed in many countries, in many contexts. Even if you go to Japan with the Yakuza, when there was the transition from this feudalist economy, you would find power vacuums filled by criminal organizations. The same happened in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The same happened in Italy when there was the collapse in southern Italy of the Bourbon Kingdom, and then there was the unification of Italy. So we can find commonalities. Today's, I would say that Italian mafias are resorting less and less to explicit violence, and they are acting as more as a complement to the state. So they are kind of So they are kind of acting as a hybrid form of governance which integrates with the state, infiltrating it. So they try to infiltrate politics. They try to infiltrate the legitimate world to launder money coming from their illicit activities and so on and so forth. In Brazil, my feeling is that the organized criminal organizations, they are still trying to replace the state in the places where they are acting. Sometimes they
are separated.
Yeah, they are acting to. Sometimes they opposed it in certain areas. Of course, I'm making a generalization. You can find, of course, local places in Italy where you find similarities and more capillary control of the territory in physical and military terms. And then you mentioned also organized crime in the UK, which is quite interesting. I wish to do more work on that because it's something relatively more recent. Criminal gangs in the UK, I mean, they started like street gangs in the Peaky Blinders style.
Yeah.
So you find these they are fragmented into thousands of fluid groups. But I'd say that at least now probably this is going to change over time. At least now, the infiltration into politics of organized crime in the UK is still lower as compared to other places where it's been. If you go to Italy, the relationship, there is always been a symbiotic relationship between the mafia and the political world. But still, even in the case of organized crime networks in the UK, I would expect to find some people acting in brokerage positions, acting in brokerage positions. So, for instance, again, tax accountants or people facilitating the logistics of illegal trafficking and so on and so forth. So I would still expect to find interfaces between the criminal world and the legitimate world, even though those connections are not entertained with politicians. But I think that this kind of brokerage role is something that would be cross cutting.
Sure. It seems then to me that the mafia networks, not all of them, but to your point, but in Italy for the most part, do seem to have this integration into or symbiosis with the general state that maybe a lot of other organized crime entities across the world maybe don't quite have to the same extent. And I think my immediate reaction to that is that seems a very, very difficult thing to address then potentially, because if it's so interwoven into the natural state of operations and the general government activities, that suddenly becomes a much more entrenched thing that you have to try and address if you're trying to address organized crime within the country. To that point then, is there room for increased use of network analysis in places like Italy, but potentially other places around the world, to better provide resources and tools to be able to address some of this criminal activity in the regions? Or is it something that's already been done to a greater degree already by crime analysts and policing within the region?
Yeah. So this is a good question. So basically, I do think that that especially with the advent of digital communication of new technologies, essentially, so we have criminal analysts have new tools to fight organized crime, and I do think that they are already using network analysis to try and see what are the focal points in the network and what would happen if we removed those points in the network. And now this brings me to another point, which is, so as I said before, criminal organizations are highly adaptive. They're exploiting these new communication technologies to expand their portfolios as well. It's become for them, it's become more easier to to trade illegal goods, like if you were on Amazon, as compared to before, where you had to meet physically. It is creating opportunities for various cyber crimes as well. So they are taking these opportunities, but on the other hand, communication technologies are also offering new tools to law enforcement to fight organized crime. So I think that nowadays they have this new battlefield represented by new technologies, because on one hand they are exploited more by they give the mafias new opportunities, and it makes their lives easier. But on the other hand, law enforcement authorities as well have new ways of tracking what happens. And I would say on that point, in that field, the important point is whether law enforcement authorities can exploit these new technologies in such a way that they keep the pace of adaptation of mafias.
Yeah, certainly. I think you mentioned earlier on that you had to essentially build a lot of this network analysis out pretty much from scratch. You didn't have the larger language models that I think have become very, very pervasive over the last year or so, that I imagine would have had a massive impact potentially on your ability to sort of fine tune in the scope of it to do this analysis. Is this something then that when moving forward, when you're doing research, I mean, you mentioned about you'd like to look more into some of the UK stuff. If you were to build out some more of this network analysis in other regions, is there a greater scope for artificial intelligence or large language modules or some of this automation that we're seeing to help improve the quality, but also the reach and the scope of some of these research opportunities that could potentially be available to you?
Yeah. So basically, there are various ways in which I think that, there are several directions that I find this exciting that could be built off the findings of this research. So, one natural step would be to find data, to have data on dynamic networks. So as I said before, we have a snapshot. We did what we could with the data we had. But I think that today we could find also data on to build criminal networks in a dynamic sense. So networks that vary over time. That would be very important, because in that with those data you could, for instance, see what happens when you set up a policy or you crack down, and then what happens to the network as a whole. So you have this before and after comparison, and you can see what happens to the network when you enact a policy to disrupt the network. Then, of course, it would be important also to have more comparative studies as well. So research on organized crime in Italy is quite, at least in economics, is prominent, because we have had this problem historically. It's mafias. We talk about mafias at least since the 18th century. So there is more historical data on the mafia. There is more possibility to study the mafias. And I would say that for the same reasons, the legal system in fighting organized crime in Italy is quite advanced, that it could be taken as an example for other countries as well. So it would be important to see to make comparative research to see what happens in other countries as well in terms of organized crime networks. And then it would be interesting to see also what happens in specific sectors. Like I became recently interested in the waste management sector, or criminal organizations are particularly active. I discovered recently in the UK as well. So they are quite involved in the both legal and illegal waste supply chain. So it would be interesting, for instance, to collect data on these supply chain networks and to see what happens when, for instance, in Italy we have this policy that allows the dissolution of a municipality council if there is suspect of infiltration with mafia. What happens if you dissolute the municipality to this network, or if you seize a given firm? What happens to their to the firm that is connected to other firms in the network in terms of their performance, or even what happens locally in terms of local economic performance, to see whether and to which extent and which policies could work in the fight of against organized crime, particularly exploiting the network and structures of these organizations.
Yeah. If I wanted to really delve into the subject matter a little bit more, whether that's network analysis or some of this sort of mafia-related activity, is there any like a good piece of research, high-quality research, or a really interesting piece of literature do you think that could really round out my knowledge on some of these areas that you would really recommend?
You mean in general on organized crime, or
organized crime, or specific to network analysis?
Well, okay, so there are a few good pieces of research. I mean, there are many good pieces of research actually on these topics. So, first of all, I'd say that the literature investigating the causes of organized crime is very, very interesting, because you really find there that you find commonalities. There are differences, but you find common points in this. And there are very well published papers in the area. Also, one of them was written by Acemoglu, who won the Nobel Prize in 2025, and he has co-authored this paper with Giuseppe De Feo, the head of department at Liverpool, who is my previous supervisor, and he's also co-author of this network analysis paper as well. So they wrote a paper on the causes and consequences as well of the Sicilian mafia. And if you go to all the related literature, it is very interesting to find these commonalities, all these factors that could drive the emergence of criminal organizations. And although they are investigating historical data, it is interesting because those conclusions could still hold today in certain markets and places when it comes to the emergence of organized crime or their strengthening. In terms of network analysis, there is a bit less work, because especially in economics, because again in economics we want to combine network analysis with causal inference. First of all, because it's very difficult to find data to build a network structure. I can suggest you. I can give you a couple of papers that build relationships between firms based on ownership, basically. But that data is very, very difficult to obtain. You need to request a license, so it's very difficult. That's why there are some obstacles to this integration with between network analysis and causal inference to make more research in economics with network data on organized crime. But I think that this is gonna be some future directions that we could explore more as researchers in the area. And then I think also the whole literature on the economics of crime in general is very nice. So this way of treating criminal behavior not like a deviant behavior, but like a rational choice where you weight your costs and benefits to choose whether to commit a crime or not, which is the pillar whole of the whole economics of crime. And we have a chapter in a university handbook on the economics of crime, which is very nice because different chapters touch different nuances of this topic. And we had a chapter on the relationships between crime and politics, essentially.
Yeah, I think that sounds really interesting stuff. So honestly, after to try and like delve into it and get a lot more info.
Actually, now I was thinking there is another paper which is very interesting by Melissa Dell, which is this paper always comes to my mind when we talk about crackdowns and policies to fight mafias. So this is focused in Mexico. So basically in organized crime in Mexico. And it's interesting because one of her findings is that when you crack down on local criminal organizations, for instance, you can divert those crimes like drug trafficking in the neighborhood municipalities. And also, by this mechanism, you could increase gang fights in the neighboring municipalities because, you are cracking down here, and then those gangs go to compete with other gangs in the neighboring municipalities, and then this increases also street fights in neighboring municipalities. So when you crack down, or when you set up a policy, you need to be really careful also to what are the spillover effects or the unintentional effects of the policies that you are setting up. And for instance, I also have a paper where we essentially, which is again on the relationships between mafia and politics. It's not with network data, but it's using causal inference methods. But essentially, we show that one electoral reform that was put in place in Italy at some point in time, which was meant, among other things, to prevent electoral manipulation by mafia, actually unintentionally exacerbated the problem. Because it increased intra-party competition, that created more demand for support from criminal organizations by politicians. And then what we find is that actually that reform had a counterproductive effect. So this is another, I think another thing to keep in mind when we talk about, fighting organized crime.
Certainly. It sounds really, really important, honestly, in terms of the applications on some of that stuff. So yeah, really good stuff to look into. Pasquale, thank you very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Where can people find you, and what kind of research and stuff would you like to point people to?
So you can find me at University of Bath. I'm in the Department of Economics. You have my email, I think.
Yeah. So I'll attach all the links to Pasquale's research in the description below. Again, thank you very much for your time.
And then if you're interested in the economics of crime, organized crime, recently I'm always touching some points, some topics in environmental and health economics. So I'm trying to diversify my interests. You are always welcome to get in touch.
Fantastic. Again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Max.